Do you see my shadow? That's so weird. That's because the window is right here and it's shining light and it's reflecting right there. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Adriana, Adventurous Catholic, and today we are going to be talking about how we can implement our faith into our workplaces. Let us get started. We are all called to share the gospel, to share Jesus Christ, to share God to the entire world. We are called to go out and to proclaim the good news to everybody, and this causes a lot of people to ask, well, what if I can't? What if I can't talk about God at work? What if I just cannot talk about him because I can get fired, or people are just not interested? So there's so many different excuses or reasons we can think of that may be a hindrance for us to proclaim or to evangelize, we can say, to evangelize very directly about God. There's a lot of ways that we can evangelize and share the gospel, share the good news without being so direct, if that makes sense. So first and foremost, we need to know that we have a call to evangelize. And this is told to us in the Bible. If you have a Bible with you or you want to look it up, you can read this with me. Mark chapter 16, verse 15 tells us, Jesus said to them, "Go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel to every creature." So just imagine, Jesus told this to his 12 disciples. He told them, go out into the whole world and proclaim the gospel. So this was about 2,000 years ago. Jesus told 12 men to go out and reach every part of the world. You and I would not have heard of Jesus Christ if it wasn't for their yes. If you are watching this and you are a Christian, then you are part of that as well. And we are also to continue to spread that truth to the entire world, the truth of Jesus Christ coming, dying for us so that we have the opportunity to go to heaven. So then obviously in comparison to the entire world, we are just a little speck, and the area that we live in is such a tiny piece compared to the entirety of the whole world. But if 12 men can come across all nations, and this was way back when, before they discovered America, so there were definitely less nations known from them back then. Even still, every part of the world right now knows Jesus Christ, like everybody. There is not a continent, there is not a country where people are 100% clueless of who Jesus is unless we haven't discovered it yet. But you can only imagine the work that Christ can do through you and I if he was able to do this through the 12 disciples. So now bringing this into the topic of the day, the workplace. Where is it that you work? And if you probably don't have a job, then you may still be surrounded by a community in school, in a sports club, in a different activity that you're associated with. But there's people who surround you, and you can definitely apply this in that setting as well. I know what it's like to have a job where you're not allowed to talk about God. You're not allowed to talk about your faith. I've worked before at a restaurant, so that was my first job. And then I've worked at an office before at a university, which is very liberal. So some people didn't even believe in God. Other people kind of did. So I definitely encountered a lot of different people. And in that setting, I wasn't necessarily prohibited from talking about my beliefs. I would share them with my coworkers. I made it pretty known to people who walked by my desk that I believed in Jesus and that I was Catholic, because of the images that I would put there. So there were a lot of nonverbal ways that I was able to express that, my belief in Christ. And because of that, because of those nonverbal ways of me communicating my faith, I got into some very great deep conversations with some coworkers who were having trouble believing, having trouble understanding the faith, or had questions about what Catholics believed. So that definitely opened up a lot of amazing opportunities that would not have opened up for them if I would have shied away from my faith. So the only reason I bring this up is to put it into context and to tell you that you might feel like you shouldn't talk about your faith because other people around you don't believe in what you believe, but you just never know what can happen if you do express what you believe in some way. And then there are some job sites that really do not allow you to talk about your faith. So I know that at one point I worked as a behavioral interventionist, and they didn't allow workers to talk with their patients about God. It's tough. I mean, me being someone who loves to talk about my faith openly, it makes it difficult for sure to, be with a family who you just don't know if they believe or not, and you just wish that they knew. So I know what that's like as well. So I'll be sharing a couple of tips for you, and you're probably going to be able to apply this if you don't know where to start in sharing your faith. So if you work in an environment where you're just not allowed to talk about your faith at all, perhaps you are also a behavior interventionist like I was, perhaps you're a teacher. I know that in a lot of schools, in public schools, teachers cannot talk about their faith to their students. If you work in a setting that also bans or prohibits you from talking about your faith to the people you work with, then know that you can still live out Catholicism. You can still live out your Christianity in the environment that you're in, living out the virtues that the church promotes, such as humility, patience, charity, obedience to authority, silence rather than gossiping, gratitude rather than complaint, and so forth. There are just so many virtues that one can live out, even if they're not allowed to convert people. Though we know that we're not the ones converting people, it's God who uses us, and God ultimately who converts people. But even still, the secular world doesn't know that. Non-Catholics don't know that. They think you're out to bring numbers into the church, and that's not true. But we can still live out our faith. Nobody is prohibiting us from doing so. And even as a teacher in a public school where, for example, I'm using this as an example, even though you could technically do this in other fields, workplaces. Whenever there is a holiday, most holidays that are celebrated are rooted in Catholicism, such as Christmas, Halloween, St. Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, what else? Easter. All of these are rooted in Catholicism. And if you are covering a lesson on that, schools will allow you to talk about these different holidays and implement them in your curriculum. They even have days off for these holidays. So you are allowed to talk about like Catholic history. You are allowed to talk about the Catholic Church, not necessarily in such a way where you are expressing that to be your own faith and trying to bring people in, but you are allowed to talk about the religion of Catholicism. And so there are a lot of ways like this where you can implement little seeds in the hearts of these students where they can get to know a little bit of who Jesus was if they don't know already, or about the Catholic Church in a positive way, since unfortunately there are so many people out there just talking negatively about Catholicism, and they're allowed to get away with it. So, I mean, you can just be that positive perspective for them that they need. growing up in this world that's very anti-Catholic. So those are just some examples of how there is still a way to evangelize and bring the gospel and share the gospel with you in your workplace, even if certain things are not permitted. Now, you may be in a different job site like I was at one point, where it's not necessarily prohibited to talk about the faith, but it's very tough to talk about it because the people around you are either not Catholic, or they were raised Catholic but then they left the faith, or they are living out mortal sin publicly. Like, you just know that they are living out a life that is not according to the will of God, such as homosexuality or transgenderism, or cohabitation, where people who are not married are still living together. In cases like this, where it's no longer about what you're allowed or not allowed to do, but you know that if you share your beliefs to a certain extent, you'll be looked at as badly, or people just may not understand and may feel pushed back, or whatever the case. If you're ever asked about these things and you just don't know how to go about it in the best way, something that I have done before, and I've found it to be quite useful, is I try to talk about these things with a perspective of a secular person. So even though I know that I am Catholic and trying to live out God's will as a Catholic, well, people around me sometimes aren't. And if I try to give them my way of looking at things as the only way, then they'll instantly be shut off, because they'll just instantly separate themselves and say, well, you think like that because you're religious. I'm not religious, so I'm not going to be convinced. So there's like a quick switch off in their minds, and they're not going to be willing to hear me out. So typically I try to find arguments from like an atheist perspective, or just a non-Catholic person in general, about these topics and why they're bad, so that people can see that not only religious people think like this, not only religious people are against abortion, not only religious people are against same-sex marriage or sex before marriage, and so on. Definitely most people who believe this are Catholic, but remember that something is not true because the Catholic Church says so. Rather, the Catholic Church says so because it is true. And so it's true across the board. It's true across morality. And you don't have to be a Catholic to be pro-life. You don't have to be a Catholic to be against transgenderism, against homosexuality, and so forth. So there's a lot of people out there who talk about these topics. There are a lot of atheists out there, for example, who bring their pro-life perspective. There are non-believers who talk about these different issues, and sometimes it's good to read what they say so that it can help you word things in a certain way, or approach people with that point of view, so that you're not telling them, well, let me tell you why this is wrong because the Bible says this and that, and they're going to be like, well, I don't even believe in the Bible, so I don't care about what you're going to say right now. It's like I said, a quick switch off in their minds. Those are some little things that can be helpful and make some people open their hearts a little bit more to that side of the argument, rather than creating a barrier right away in their own minds. The most important thing that we need to do is pray, pray, pray. I can't say that enough. We must pray so that we do things according to God's timing, not our own timing, allowing Him to show us the opportunities and taking those opportunities and leaving the rest to God. And then other times we may think it's an opportunity, but it just may not be. It might be the wrong time to go about it. God calls everybody in different, unique ways, in different points of their life. Not everybody is called to know Him at a particular age or in a particular setting. Everybody has their own journeys, and that's beautiful, but it can also be frustrating if you let it if you start to lose hope. So let's do our part and leave the rest to God. All right, so that is all I wanted to share with you today, my friends. I hope you learned something from this. God bless you all. Stay faithful, my friends, and I will see you all next week.